The cameras were already rolling when the tension hit its breaking point. The air in the chamber felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if history itself had decided to pause and hold its breath. 1,000 flashes from journalists' cameras lit up the room like lightning on a summer night, but all eyes, all ears, all hearts were fixated on one sharp voice that cut across the silence. Donald J. Trump, standing tall behind the microphone, leaned forward with his hand pressed against the wooden podium. His eyes, narrow and blazing, locked onto the man seated a few feet away, and then, with a tone as sharp as broken glass, he spoke words that would ripple across the nation. "Sit down, boy." The insult hung in the air, heavy, cruel, and unmistakable. For a fraction of a second, the room froze. Journalists stopped typing. Senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the marble walls of the chamber seemed to recoil at the ugliness of the remark. Barack Obama didn't move immediately. He sat there, calm, hands folded neatly in front of him, his expression a mask of composure. But behind his eyes memories stirred, of battles fought, of struggles endured, of a life built not in spite of such words but because of them. To understand why this moment mattered, you had to know the story of the man now rising to his feet. Barack Obama had lived his life as proof of resilience. Raised by a single mother in Hawaii, molded by the wisdom of his grandparents, shaped by the shadows of racial prejudice and the bright light of education, he carried within him the quiet determination of those who believed America could be more than it had been. He was not a perfect man, but he was a man who believed in something larger than himself, an ideal stitched into the very fabric of the nation's founding promise. Trump, on the other hand, was a storm personified. A businessman who thrived on disruption, a politician who drew power from division, he believed strength was shown by dominance, by breaking your opponent before they could break you. He had risen to the presidency through sheer will and audacity, defying the predictions of pollsters and the rules of decorum alike. Where Obama sought unity, Trump thrived in conflict, and now these two legacies, so different, so diametrically opposed, stood face to face in front of America. Obama rose slowly, not with haste but with gravity, as though he were pulling up the weight of generations along with him. His height gave him an easy presence, but it was his silence that shook the room. He looked at Trump, then at the faces of those watching, some tense, some fearful, some waiting for the spark that might set the whole chamber aflame. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, carrying the steadiness of a man who had seen storms before. "Mr. Trump," Obama began, "I've been called many names in my life. Some I've ignored, some I've laughed at, and some I've taken as reminders of how far we still have to go. But I will never, not for a single second, forget that this nation was built by men and women who refused to sit down when told to. My grandfather marched so his children could stand. My mother taught me that dignity is not given, it is lived, and I will not sit down today, not when the future of this country still demands that we all stand up." The chamber erupted not with cheers, not with applause, but with something deeper. A hush of awe, a ripple of recognition that this was no ordinary exchange. It was a collision of America's past and future, its fears and its hopes. But this story was not only about two men. Outside the chamber, America itself was unraveling under the weight of division. On one side, protests filled the streets, citizens carrying signs that read justice, equality, unity. On the other, voices shouted back with anger, with resentment, with fear of being left behind. The nation was like a family at war with itself. Each side convinced the other was tearing apart the home they all shared. In Chicago, a young black college student named Malik watched the moment unfold on a cracked phone screen. He had been feeling hopeless, wondering if anything he studied in his history classes really mattered anymore. But as he heard Obama's words, something shifted. He saw not just a former president, but a reflection of his own struggle. To rise, to speak, to be seen. Meanwhile, in a small town in Pennsylvania, an older man named Henry sat in his recliner, arms crossed. He had voted for Trump, believing the man was the only one who could protect his way of life. But hearing the slur, seeing Obama's response, Henry felt something crack inside. It wasn't politics, it was decency. He remembered his own father, a coal miner who had taught him never to belittle another man's dignity. For the first time, Henry wondered if he had been cheering for the wrong fight. Back in the chamber, Trump's face reddened. He was not used to being met with quiet strength. He preferred shouting matches, preferred chaos he could twist to his advantage. But Obama's words had not been a fight, they had been a mirror, and in that mirror Trump saw not strength, but cruelty. For days, the media replayed the exchange. Analysts dissected every syllable, every pause, every gesture. Some claimed Trump had only spoken out of anger. Others said Obama's response would be remembered for decades. But what mattered most was not what the experts said, it was what people felt. Across dinner tables, in classrooms, on factory floors, Americans found themselves asking a harder question. What kind of country do we want to be? The climax came a week later when Obama, invited to speak at a rally in Atlanta, took the stage before thousands. He didn't mention Trump by name. He didn't need to. Instead, he told the story of a nation that had always been pulled between its worst instincts and its best possibilities. He spoke of Lincoln, who led with empathy, of King, who marched with courage, of ordinary people who chose to stand when standing seemed impossible. And then he said, "What defines us is not the insults we hurl, but the hope we carry. If we want to heal, we must stand together, not as boys, not as enemies, but as Americans." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, and for a moment the divisions seemed to fade. By the time the night ended, Malik had already signed up to volunteer for a voter registration drive. Henry had written a letter to his local paper, urging his neighbors to choose leaders who lift us, not tear us down. And across America, in small ways and big, people felt the echo of Obama's words. The story did not end that night, nor did it erase the fractures in the nation. But it planted something, an ember of hope, a reminder that dignity still mattered, that words still carried power, and that even in the darkest of moments, America could be reminded of its better self. And so the lesson lingered. Strength is not in silencing others. It is in standing tall when the world tells you to bow. It is in answering cruelty with dignity, arrogance with wisdom, hate with hope. Trump had told him to sit down. Obama had chosen to stand, and in doing so, he left America with a silence far louder than any insult ever could be.